So it was interesting that when we talked about that first lesson, that discipleship begins with a rightly ordered love. In other words, we have to put who we love in the correct order before we can be an effective disciple, or actually before we can be a faithful disciple, or maybe even a true disciple. Because if we don't love God first, then I don't think that you even qualify for being a disciple. But as it turns out, after the vice president gave this great speech and basically gave a lesson on what Ordo Amoris meant, of the order of the rightly ordered love, or how our love is ranked, the Pope came out and issued something of a correction to him, and several other Catholic bishops and cardinals in the hierarchy did. But then there were two particular cardinals, Cardinal Burke of the United States and Cardinal Sarah of Africa, probably the two smartest, most devout, and most faithful, most intelligent of all of the cardinals in the Catholic Church, came out and corrected the Pope and the rest of them and said, no, the Vice President had it right, and this needs to be taught to everybody because it is a basic, fundamental. It's not a doctrine, but it's sort of a foundational stone of the right kind of Christian life, of discipleship. We have to have, you tell kids all the time, get your priorities in order. But for the Christian, we have to get our priorities in order, but we also have to get our love in order. It begins with love for God, and then it goes down step by step, all the way down. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting, that all of those things have happened. Well, tonight we are going to talk about the parable of the rich fool. And I gave you the passage itself. I made some highlights for you of some things we're going to touch on, and then some sort of talking points down at the bottom. So I want to take just a moment and read through this. And this is the English Standard Version, and then we'll begin. Someone in the crowd said to him being Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you've prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.' And he said to his disciples, 'Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? Do not seek what you're to eat and what you're to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Now, there is one highlight that I forgot to make, and it's the last little part of verse 14 at the top. One's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions. I just didn't highlight that, but if you mark it. Let me ask you right off the top if you have any questions or comments about this passage. Anything that might stick in your craw or cause you to have a question. Have you ever read it before? This is one of those passages that I think all of us know about. I think there's a lot of things that make this passage kind of famous. I think probably the most obvious one is how often the phrase, consider the lilies of the field. How often that phrase is used. I also think that those probably everybody in this room, except the two kids at the front here, and Matt at the back, are probably familiar with one of Martin Luther King's sermons that he played on this about your soul being required of you, and that part of this passage became very famous because it was made popular or famous in the media and in history classes. But as far as the meaning of the thing, I think that we have missed it a lot. This is a lesson that Jesus uses to teach us, like he does in all parables. Jesus says hard things in easy to understand ways. Now, it may be less easy for us to understand today because we are not an agricultural people anymore. So I don't even know if we went down to the youth room right now. I don't know if you took them out in the yard, if it was springtime, and asked them to find a lily, they might be walking around all day long. But you know, this whole business of crops and storehouses and all this, it kind of, so we have to rein it in a little bit. So there's a couple of things. Let's just start and take a look at this. So it begins with sort of an argument. There's this argument, tell my brother to split the inheritance with me. And Jesus takes that to launch into something else, but I love the way Jesus answers him to start with. He says, do I look like a probate judge? This is your business. But now that you brought it up, take care and be on your guard. Actually, the sense of the Greek word there is beware. Not be aware, but beware, like there's danger here. Beware against covetousness. Now, let me explain covetousness. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's whatever. When you're a teenager or a middle schooler, you always, we don't use King James anymore, but boy, when you use King James, if you get to the rest of that passage, there was always snickering in the back row of the church because all those teenage boys were laughing about what you shouldn't covet. Nevertheless, Sunday school teachers, well-meaning Sunday school teachers of kids, at least in my church, would always say, covet. When the Lord says don't covet, it means you shouldn't want something that somebody else has. That's actually not true. It's not wrong to want something like if this morning, I'll give you for instance, I'm going to embarrass him. So, Adam has such nice hair. And I told him this, and I have zero hair. So I told him this morning, I said, man, I like your hair. His hair's growing out. I like what you're doing with it. I like that. And I would love to have it. There's nothing wrong with that. What would be wrong is if after church was over, I waited in the back with a tomahawk and scalped him. Covetousness is wanting something so bad that you'll do something that you probably ought not to do in order to get it. It's not saying, Mark, I like those shoes.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want them, but I'm just saying I like them. But I like those shoes, and then going out tomorrow to wherever and getting a pair of shoes like them. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong with it is if I cheated Mark out of his shoes or something like that. Covetousness. So in this case, here's this brother out of the blue who wants somebody to intervene and make his brother give him part of the inheritance. He doesn't say, and I think this is telling. He doesn't say my inheritance. He says, divide the inheritance. And it's written that way in Greek. It's very definitive. Divide the inheritance. Maybe he was written out of the will. Maybe the other brother got the inheritance. And now he's jealous and he wants it. That's the implication here. Because it seems unlikely that Jesus would just out of the blue bring up covetousness. And especially when he answered him in such a way. I'm not, the probate judge. So this guy is wanting something that's obviously not his. And he is willing to do something that's semi-underhanded in order to do it. In other words, he's trying to get somebody else to intervene to force the brother to give him part of the inheritance. Y'all follow that? So that's covetousness. Now, if it was rightfully his, that's a whole different thing. But that's not what we get the sense of here. So anyway, Jesus says, beware, guard against your covetousness, because life doesn't consist of the abundance of possessions. I would argue, as you think about where people are today versus where they have been over the last, 2,000 years, it's quite possible that our great-great-great-great-grandparents were far more happy than we are. And they had far, far less than we do. Some of you, I remember as a child, my grandparents, I did live with them for a while, and but practically lived with them. And there was no air conditioning in the house. There was, practically everything that we ate was either grown or raised or, and butchered and everything else, or hunted and things like that. But there was happiness. There tended to be no, lack of peace. There was no push to succeed, and no drive to have to be better than this person. Although I do remember one time, and there was one time when I was probably, middle 70s, 1975 or so. My grandfather had a great friend who was also a farmer, and his name was Paul Wells. And Mr. Paul got the first John Deere. It was a big tractor. It was one of the first that we had that anybody saw around here. It had that big glass encased cabin in it that it had air conditioning and a radio. And I do remember my granddaddy said, "Boy, I'd like to have one of those." And I think he could have afforded it. I just don't think he ever decided to get it. But other than that, I don't know that there was ever any drive in simpler times to. And now we're madly rushing off to work, and we drive an hour and a half to go 15 miles to work, and we have to, make sure that we, get there ahead of everybody else so it looks better for us, and we can get in line for the promotion and all that. And we got all that worry on us, and then we live with these huge mortgages and debt and all of this, just struggling to keep up with what? Who? Somebody else, I guess. Jesus said, hold on. Life doesn't consist in the abundance of possessions. In other words, there's something much more than that. And then he told them a parable, and he said this. The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? And he said, I will do this. By the way, this is the most confusing part of the whole thing. Why would he tear down perfectly good buildings in order to build more? Well, there's a reason for this. This shows that this man is obviously, seriously, he's not thinking clearly. He's only focused on the abundance of his wealth and what he can do. The tearing down of these old buildings proves he doesn't even have to worry about the cost of what he's taken down, what he put into it, because he's not concerned about that. He's only concerned about building bigger and bigger and bigger so that he can put the abundance of his things, and it doesn't matter if he shucks those old ones down. So his priorities are already offset. I'll store all my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Well, so there is in this certainly a self-assurance and a self-reliance and a sense of self-worth and self-sufficiency. This guy is all about him. He's like, remember that nursery rhyme, Little Jack Horner sat in the corner doing something, and he's, I can't remember. I almost said eating curds and whey, but that was the other kid.
No, that's it.
That's it?
That's it.
I thought it was Little Miss Muffet that was eating curds and whey. She sat on the tuffet.
Eating her
curds and whey, and along came a spider and sat down beside her. And scared little Jack Horner sat in the corner eating some kind of pie, and he stuck in his thumb and he pulled out a plum and he said, "What a good boy am I." That's what he was eating, some kind of pie. Must have been plum, I guess. I say that now that we've gone down the Mother Goose route. That's another thing kids today don't have. What, Mark?
The sermon just got hijacked.
That's it. That's it. That's it.
Where's the dirt bike?
Where's the dirt bike? That's right. That's right. That's right. That was, I tell you what, y'all are doing an awesome job. I really mean that. Those kids are wonderful. But they come up with some, where did that come from? A dirt bike. Jesus on a dirt bike.
He just got a dirt bike from his granddad, from his dad for his birthday.
Oh, there you
He's
go.
just looking for any excuse.
Any excuse to talk about it. That's it. All right. This is kind of like little Jack Horner. You know, he's so proud of himself. Look at me. Look at me. This guy has this sense that I am just great. You know, it's all about me. The world revolves around me, and I can sit back and I can relax and eat, drink, and be merry, and all is well. I don't have anything to concern myself with. And then the Lord said to him, "You fool." This is about the strongest thing you could say to somebody. We have, again, in modern language, sort of neutered some of these words, but fool meant somebody who was dumb as a rock, in the sense that their head wasn't screwed on straight, their focus was all wrong, they were ignorant of the most basic and most important things, and they just were too incapable of understanding it, grasping it. So this is a condemnation. And this is why Jesus goes on to say, don't call somebody a fool, because what you're saying is you're too dumb to get it. You're never going to grasp it, and you're just, that is about as low as you can go. So anyhow, God says this is who you are, however, because you're fixing to cut the TV on and order pizza and sit back and watch reruns of I Love Lucy or something, and think about all your wealth, and you ain't going to live to see it tomorrow. Now what's important to you? Tonight, your soul is required of you. That is such a beautifully poetic way of saying you're going to die, but more than that, it's a beautiful way of saying the sense in this passage is that you have just received a summons to appear before the judge. And there's no way you can wiggle out of it. Paul says, we die and then we face the judgment. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So immediately upon our death, we go and we stand in the presence of God. And we, I won't go deeply into this except to mention it, but we do believe that in that moment of death and judgment, every person has a particular judgment. And we receive a sentence for where we will be eternity, and then we are stationed, I guess you could say, in sort of the ante-room or the ante-chamber, maybe call it the front porch of our eternal destination, either heaven or hell. And you wait there until the Lord returns, and the dead are, all the dead and the living stand before Him in final judgment, and your sentence is read out in front of everybody, and along with everybody else's sentence, and you go to your final place forever. But anyhow, This is the wake-up call. Fool, tonight you will stand before the judge of heaven and earth, and you will face your eternal judgment. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So go back for a minute to talk about the certainty, and I know this is not something that we like to talk about, but the absolute certainty of death. If Jesus does not return in our lifetime, everybody in this room is going to die. As good as hospitals are, every hospital has a 100% failure rate. Think about that. They patch you up for a while, maybe, but it ultimately doesn't work. Everybody is going to die. And whether you believe it or not, everybody is going to face judgment. And so this is why a disciple, somebody who is not just following Jesus but learning from and growing in Jesus, would do everything they could to make sure that they are ready for that moment when their soul is required of them. And Jesus says, so it is for somebody who lays up treasure for himself but is not rich toward God. So that's a very interesting passage. Oh, I need to go back and say something else. Also, in addition to that preparation for judgment, one of the things that I think we've done a really poor job of in the church, and I think our culture has helped it along, and that is teaching people about personal accountability. Because it's so easy now to get out of almost anything. And it's, everybody wants a level playing field. Everything is fair and equal. Nobody's penalized for anything. Everything you can go. Everything from quickie, no penalty divorces to the notion that everybody gets a trophy in Tea League. You don't have to be good, you just have to show up. And everybody gets the same thing. You could be the worst player on the team, you're still going to get rewarded. You could not put anything into the marriage at all. And it could be totally your fault, but you're going to get out of it unscathed. There's no accountability. And part of the original operational style, I guess, of the Methodist Church was the small groups, the class structure that Wesley created. And in order to be a member of a Methodist society, that was the early term for the church. But to be a member of a Methodist society, you had to be a part of a small group. And the first question that you were asked when you went in, it was kind of like AA in some way, but everybody had to go to a weekly class meeting. And there was a leader, and the first question the leader asked when you walked in the door, how is it with your soul? That's the easy one. Then, in front of everybody, they would go on to ask, what sins have you committed since we last met. And it went on from there. They held each other accountable, not in the sense that they wanted to say, "Oh, I'm better than you," or "Let me tell you what he did. Let me tell you, oh, you won't believe what I learned about her," or something like that. But they held each other accountable because we need that. We need people to pray for us and walk with us, and sometimes it's hard. It's difficult to grow and mature, even live the Christian life by yourself. You need somebody to sort of walk with you. I think that's one of the things that has made so many churches so weak, because we don't have accountability. We don't know how to pray for each other because we don't really know what each other needs. We don't want people involved in the inner portions of our lives. We don't want people to know our business. But I think, I've said it at some point, this is part of our national culture of being American. We're sometimes too independent. We think we don't need anybody. We can do everything by ourselves, when in fact we need God, but we also need one another. John Wesley said there's no holiness but social holiness. Now the liberals, the progressives took that and ran with it and said that Wesley was talking about social justice, and that had nothing to do with it. There was no such thing. In Wesley's language, the notion of social meant together. Basically what he was saying was, it's impossible for a man or a woman to grow in holiness without being in a group of other men holding him accountable or her accountable for growing in holiness. You could extrapolate that upward to the church as well. It's impossible for us to live as Christians if in a faithful and effective way, if our church is just a place where people come for an hour on Sunday and worship and barely talk to each other, barely get to know each other, and then disperse. We have to be intimately involved in each other's lives, and we have to hold each other accountable. So there is that. We have to do it, but also God holds us accountable. So you know what? If we're not going to allow anybody else to hold us accountable in order that we might get right, we're definitely going to be held accountable by God when it's too late to get anything. Now we can move forward. Being rich toward God. What does that mean? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself, but is not rich toward God. Well, true riches in this regard means the pursuit of Christian virtue. That's a more of a seminary term, but it means growing in love and growing in mercy and growing in compassion and growing in your love for the truth and those kind of things. It means sanctification. Protestants and Roman Catholics call it sanctification, the process of becoming holy. The Orthodox in the East call it theosis, the process of becoming like God, same thing. But being rich towards God means becoming more like God. It means living in obedience to God's will. It means bearing the image of God. There's a couple of Latin phrases that you could use. Imago Dei, which means the image of God. And so it's the notion that we should live as Christians in imago Dei, in the image of God. They should see God when they see us. There's one that's even a little bit more specific. In persona Christi. When they see us, they should see the person of Christ. They should see Christ in us. We should live coram Deo. We should live in before the face of God, constantly aware that God is watching us. God is observing everything we do. So we should live to please Him. And then finally, soli Deo Gloria. We should live only for the glory of God. If we live for anything other than to bring God glory, we're living for the wrong thing. So this is what we're talking about here. Being rich towards God means that. John Calvin, the great reformer and the man who created the Presbyterian, or who started the Presbyterian and Reformed churches, saw that he interpreted this passage that our love for God must be above all things, and it must be in all things. And then he went down the path of saying, and this is most especially seen in our stewardship. Now, it's interesting that he did that. You might say, on the surface, why in the world would Calvin turn that around and go down to talking about money? Why do you think? Because the whole thing is based on money. It starts out talking about money. Give me my inheritance. Then the guy's talking about money. I got so much stuff. I'm proud of myself. So John Calvin says being rich in God is loving God above all things, and to such a degree that every penny that you have is used for the glory of God. Whether it's your wealth, whether it's your possessions, whether it's the gifts you have, Calvin says the proper stewardship of what God has blessed you with is an indication of how rich you are towards God. I cannot disagree with it. Of course, I'm a fan of Calvin, but can't disagree with that. I think he's exactly right. Luther, one of the other great reformers and the father of the Reformation, Luther said that being rich toward God means to trust God alone for your security. Now, I think Luther takes the upper part of that passage and then the lower part and comes up with this. He said, Luther's argument was, this man's granaries, his storehouses, his money, his wine cellars, whatever he had, none of that's going to do him any good when he stands before God in judgment. If he trusts in this stuff, he's in bad shape. I love that old, it's a bumper sticker kind of thing. I've never seen a U-Haul attached to a hearse, because you can't take it with you, and it won't do you any good, even if you could. And then Luther goes on to say that we must trust in God, and then he goes a step further and he says, and therefore our focus should be on things that can't be taken away from us when we die. Faith, hope, love, acts of kindness, they will all be credited to us. So it's generosity to others. Now, St. Augustine said, and he's 1,100 years before Calvin and Luther, and he says being rich towards God, he says the same. He says being rich towards God is keeping the greatest commandments. Loving God with all your heart and loving your neighbor as yourself. If you do these things, you'll be fine. But then he says that if you love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself, you will see anything that God blessed you with, any of your earthly wealth, not as a possession to kick back and rest, eat, drink, and be merry and be proud of, but rather as tools that God has given you to help other people. And this plays into something in just a minute. It's tools of service rather than objects of self-indulgence. Does that make sense? By the way, you discover things every time you study the Bible. And one of the things that this has nothing to do with theology. It just has to do with a common word. Somebody tell me what is the name of the thing that you can look up. It's a book, and it has synonyms and antonyms and all. Thesaurus. Yeah, that's right. The word for, let me go back up. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. Word barn in here, and somehow in some place down in verse 24, storehouse. The word is thesauroi, and it's the word we get thesaurus from. And the word thesaurus itself simply means a storehouse of words. And I just thought that was interesting. It's just a place where you keep words. So that's free. You don't have to pay for that. So he said to his disciples, I tell you, don't be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you put on. For life is more than food, the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, yet God feeds them. How much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. So, the first thing to note there, number 5 on your list, is the futility of worry. There is no point in worry. I worry, and I know you worry, and I have been told more times in the last 6 months or so by people that they're worried, just all kinds of folks, that they're worried than maybe I have ever been told in my entire ministry. And I think it's a natural thing to worry, but that it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean we should not try to overcome it, because God is ultimately in control, and God is going to take care of those He loves. Now, it may not be in the way we want it to be. Nobody's ever guaranteed that. Not in this life. But He will take care of us. And I hope, I need to rush so I can show you some of this in a minute. But the word worry, let me just tell you what the word worry means. It means in Greek to be so overly concerned with something that you're obsessed with it. That makes sense? Does that not describe worry pretty good? To be so overly concerned with something that you are obsessed with it. So this is not the same thing as saying like, oh, well, you know what, I'm worried I'm going to be late, but you still, stick around with your, buddies at the restaurant, and just take your time. You're not that worried. If you were, you'd leave. But it's not the same thing as saying I'm worried that my, cake is going to burn. This is like, I can't sleep because I can't get this out of my head kind of thing. That's what that kind of worry is. You can't add anything to your life by worrying. But what you can do is learn how to trust God more. Turn your worry over to God. This is one of the things Jesus is saying. It's futile to worry. Because God is in control. And he says how he is in control. Because look at the birds. They don't plant crops. They don't harvest crops. They don't have storehouses or granaries, silos and all this. But they don't miss meals. Or God provides for them. And think, this is the second time Jesus has said this business about you being more valuable than birds. And how much more value are you than the birds? And then he says, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They don't work. They don't make their own clothes. I do love the spin thing. I just always have this idea of this spinning wheel and all this. But that's hard work. The stoles that I had on this morning, the stole that I had on, came from Guatemala. We were on a mission trip down there. And there was a lady in a village who had a spinning wheel, and she made these stoles. And she sold them. I think she got ripped off in how she sold them into the American market. But so I have all the colors of those, and they're all handmade. She made those. I don't think that way. I don't have a mechanical mind or an engineering kind of mind. So it boggles my mind to sit there and watch this lady, and she's got this thread going this way, and then it's this thread, and then it's this thread, and up here it's green, and down here it's green, but in the middle there's red, and there's blue, and there's yellow, and boom, it's a cross when it's done. I don't know how she did it. It's miraculous. But it's work. It's laborious. I mean, this is not something that some machine is just spitting out. But Jesus says, the flowers don't do that. And they're more beautiful than Solomon's robes when he was the grandest king in Israel. And yet, God clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today. The flowers are blooming, but tomorrow is going to be cut down and burned. So don't worry. How much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? Go back up to 23, because I need to say something more about this in a minute. What I just mentioned. Life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. The true perspective on life is to understand that we're not here for however many years we inhabit this planet, and that's all there is. We're here, yes, to enjoy the life that God has given us on this earth. We're here to have fun with what God has provided for us, and I think He wants us to be happy. He wants us to have as enjoyable life as is possible in a fallen world. But we also need to make sure that above all else we make plans for the world to come, because when this short life is over, there's a life that never ends that comes after this one. And if we don't make the preparation for that now, that next one's going to be a Lulu. And this takes us back up to tonight your soul will be required of you. How many people think about that? And how many people think about what's important in life now? That my life is more than food, it's more than clothes, it's more than the car I drive, it's more than the vacation home that I have, or it's more than my bank account, or whatever. Because a lot of people don't see it that way. That's why when, the stock market crashed in 1929, people were jumping out of windows. And it's why when 2008 hit, people were jumping out of windows. People think, oh, my life is over because I don't have any money. Life is not about that. This doctrine of the providence of God is critical and is not taught a lot. In fact, I think that Methodists have gotten the raw end of the deal on this, because, I know this as a fact, that so many of the people that I have served with across the years have been so opposed in their minds to what they thought Calvinism was. Not what they learned, because they didn't learn it. They just heard other people talking about it and saying, oh, we have to be against this because Calvin was for that, and so we're not Presbyterians, and we're not this, that, and the other. And John Wesley himself said there is not a hair's breadth difference between me and John Calvin. I think people, love to dismiss things that might give them hiccups, that might put them on the spot. But one of the key doctrines that Methodists particularly have been cheated out of learning about is the providence of God. God not only sees everything we do, and God not only watches over everything we do, God provides. He cares for us in very tangible ways. And this passage is also a reminder of the providence of God. Consider the ravens. They don't do anything, but God feeds them. Consider the lilies. They don't do anything, but God clothes them. So you don't need to worry. How much more is God going to feed and clothe you? So don't seek what you are to eat or to drink, or be worried. In other words, don't be so preoccupied over your earthly stuff that you can't focus on anything else. Because that's going to be okay. You're going to be taken care of. I don't mean that you sit back and say, all right, God, pour it all down. That's not the way that's a really naive way to interpret that. People come, and this is the point I wanted to make. People come and say, well, wait a minute. Are you saying that God is going to provide when there's so much hunger in the world and there is so much poverty in the world? What do you mean God is going to provide? There's no evidence of that. Mother Teresa was asked one day why there were so many hungry people in the world if God loved them. And she said, it's not that God doesn't love them. It's that the people that God put here to feed them don't love them. Mother Teresa was right. The way you reconcile this, because a very naive way to say it would be, well, we don't have to worry about hunger. God's going to feed us. We don't have to worry about that. There's a guy on the corner down here. God's going to feed us. No. Go back up to being rich toward God. What does it mean to be rich towards God? It means doing what the Lord has called you to do. God has placed the church here, the Christian here, to do His work in the world. Being rich toward God means being obedient toward God, remember? Remember in Matthew 25, Jesus speaks of being hungry and all that, the parable of the sheep and the goats. And His followers were the one who fed the hungry and clothed the naked and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Jesus is not contradicting Himself. He's not throwing out some magical new doctrine that we don't ever have any responsibility for our brothers and sisters. Actually, what He's saying is God will take care of them. But remember, you are God's instrument in the world. And if you don't take care of, if you don't do your part, then you are not you're not rich towards God. All of this goes back and forth and points to individual scriptures. Back and forth, back and forth. So, what about all those people who truly die of hunger? Well, it means that God's people failed. It didn't mean that God failed. Because God has placed us in every area of life to do His work. I saw a video yesterday in New York City, and it was a homeless man, and he was complaining very, very angrily. And there was a body laying on the street behind him, and they were putting a tarp over the body. And it was his friend, a homeless guy, and he had died in the middle of the night. And he said two things. Number one, he said, right down this street, there are people who are illegal in this country, and they're staying in luxury hotels and getting all the food that they want. And my friend is dead. And then he said, and look right over there. And there was a church. And he said, people step by us and step over us every day going into that church. I think that's an indictment on the nation and an indictment on the church. Homelessness is a problem. Hunger is a problem. And all that. We don't need to get into the politics of it. But the bottom line is, if there is hunger, if there are people in this world who are hungry, don't have enough food and whatnot, it's not because God doesn't want them to. It's because the people God put here to make sure that they have what they need aren't doing their part. So Jesus ends it up by saying, seek first His kingdom and everything will be added to you. Put God first, and then you don't have to worry about the moment your soul is required of you. You put God first, you don't have to worry about becoming self-indulgent and self-centered, because God will always be first. Put God first, and if enough people put God first, I think you'd see an immediate decline in hunger and poverty and homelessness and all of this other kind of stuff. If we put God first, the world would be a better place. Life would be better for everybody. Homes would be better. Families would be better. Church would be better. And that's really the message for the disciple. Don't make it as your priority being more concerned about what you have down here than what you will receive when this life is over. So if you put God first, you'll never have to worry about that. Anybody have any questions? All right. Everybody awake? Nothing to drive home? Okay, all right. All right, well, I'll see y'all later. I'm being summoned again, so in the hallway.